Good afternoon, friends. David Wright here, and I am your host of the Disruptive Innovators Champions of Digital Business podcast. And this afternoon, I am lucky enough to be joined by Soma Venkat. Soma, it's a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you, David. It's a pleasure here. I listened to your podcast and I told some of my friends that I'm going to talk to you on a digital receptors. They said, are you going to David's? So I think you are popular. That's very good. Wonderful.
Wow, I'm like humbled and blown away by that because I still shudder to hear myself talk when I listen back to some of these episodes. It's really easy when we have guests like yourself because it just makes my job that much easier. But again, so it's a pleasure to have you. For those of our listeners that might not be familiar, can you just tell everybody a little bit about your current role?
Sure. I'm currently the global CIO for Cooper Standard. Cooper Standard is more a material science company. Our major revenues from automotive tier OEMs as our customers, but we also supply to a lot of other bases, anywhere from housing contractors to right now we signed a deal with Nike for putting our rubber parts in their shoes. So it's a variety of products, and largely our main revenue, of course, comes from automotive industry. So I also take care of the digital aspect of that and AI and a few other roles. And
It's ever expanding, I know, and excited to learn more about Cooper. We've had some similar folks from similar industries on, so I'm always intrigued. But we like to start the episode, Soma, with just one piece of actionable advice. If nothing else, you'd look to leave everyone with today.
one thing I have used as a mantra in my career and my growth is have higher ideals, higher goals. Everything else follows from there. So what do I mean by that is if you look at the sun and go towards that, shadows will follow. Shadows like position, power, money, and all those things will follow once you have a higher goal, a purpose which you can stick to. And if you don't, if you try to follow and try to catch your shadows, you'll never be able to do that. So don't go behind power, money, and all those things, but go behind an ideal. So more as a service. So when we ask kids, what do you want to become? Don't say I want to be a doctor or an engineer or a healthcare provider. Say that I want to help people. I want to make this impact on the society. That kind of a goal is what all of us should strive for. That has helped me tremendously, not only growing, which is, as I said, follows, it also gives you satisfaction. It gives you an amount of purpose. And as long as you have a compass, correct, you can change industries, you can change this, and your purpose will in that same goal on that. But that's one key takeaway that's helped me, and it continues to drive me. Then it's independent of the goal, independent of the market, independent of your outside forces. You can do the work, you can do what you want to do because your goals are always much higher than what it is.
Just identify with that so much. I feel like there was a moment in my career, and I've probably talked about it at some point on one of these episodes, but where I had that kind of turning point where it was like going from that kind of selfish outlook of like, how am I going to get mine? How am I going to get what I don't think I have today or defend what I'm afraid I might lose, and switch the mindset to I'm okay right now in this moment, right? What a blessing that I'm even sitting here today on earth. And how can I be of service? How can I help someone? And like you said, the fulfillment I get when I'm coming from that place of service versus is significant in and of itself. And my experience has been the more that I focused on being of service in the world and coming from that place, that was when we 10x'd our growth, right? Like you said, it follows. Wow, it really did. And moreover, people can sense when people are genuine about that, I feel.
That is very true. And also, I think one of the things I find is, which is people forget that at times, is when you do this as a goal which is higher, it could be serving a people, serving a person, or even a higher scientific goal. I wanted to produce the next best material in the world, whatever it is. You have a goal of that level. The journey itself becomes pleasurable. I think that's a
Right.
piece you need, right? Even if you say I fall short of the goal, you are no longer thinking because the end goal is critical, but the journey is a difference. in all our lives about the whole journey itself. I think that drives you more after a while.
100%. Because, if you're only ever striving towards what's in the future, you don't tend to enjoy the ride there. And moreover, you're never satisfied. It's always what's next. That's not to say that we shouldn't have goals, because I have plenty, but I think you're absolutely right. Having that higher purpose really grounds you in the joy of the work and the journey. It's really cool. So let's talk a little bit about you as an executive. You're a global CIO of this huge company. Where did you start out, and how did you get to the point that you're at in your career today?
I think I would like to talk a little bit about that as more an interesting difference to where I am today to where I started, right? If you talk about goals, definitely my goal was not to come here and become a CIO of any of those, right? And that's not something that you plan for. But what I had in when I was growing up, I grew up in India, right? I wouldn't say I'm poor or struggled or any of those things. I was not the richest kid, but I didn't have to worry about food or anything like some people may expect that, hey, I'm from India, I'm poor. It was not the scenario, but I did go to school there. I come from a family of folks who are educators. So my granddad was a teacher. My dad was a banker, but he used to teach before. My uncles were all professors. So my goal was to say, let's go and teach and be in that noble profession about that. And that's what my idea was to do. So when I finished my bachelor's, I'll tell you an interesting story. When I did my master's in India, and I did master's in mathematics, and 65% of them in my class were women. And so when you think about India, a lot of people have a perception that there is not enough women educated. There was very good, equally empowered, and very brilliant. I competed with all of them to come. And then when I came here to North America to continue with my PhD, there are not enough women in math. That's the first time I started hearing these stereotypes that women cannot do math and things like that. And I remember that vividly because I remember being shocked at that. Even years, you never hear that, and you come back and say that well, women cannot do math or women are not good in math was a surprise. Again, the reason I'm trying to tell you that is we all have some perceptions. It's important to break those perceptions. And I had to do that myself. And I said I wanted to be a faculty. I came here, I started teaching, and I had to break the perception that there are other aspects of this which are going to be equally challenging, equally service-oriented, equally intellectually appealing. I moved the industry to start doing the same things which I could do. One of my first jobs was taking newspaper articles, today it's easier, and creating an abstract automatically. I'm talking in early 90s was not something which was done commonly. So you had to create your dictionary of English. It was in English. You had to create a dictionary of English and put weightage to words. And this was an amazing kind of an intellectual exercise. But more importantly, I found that when I started growing up, I had no idea these things existed. I didn't have a computer. So there was no options on that when I was growing up. But I come here and I found that I can manage this. And when I'm in Canada, to do my graduate studies, I could get access to supercomputing to do my work. And some of these experiences are not planned. You always have these things to come. And I know some people who know exactly, I wanted to be a doctor for life. And I did not have any of those ambitions to say, I want to do this. I said, guys, I wanted to learn. I wanted to become something. But more importantly, I want to serve. I want to learn. The learn aspect of that stayed on. The more you go back, I think, how do you learn? What can you learn something new? And how can you provide that? So that's my background on that is I came with 2 suitcases with a loan in the bank to take for the airplane. That was my first trip outside the country. And when I came here, came here to start studying and hopefully finish it in a few years and go back. I thought I'll get my degree and go back to the country, but I stayed on. And I came to US in early 90s. And my first job was in Houston. I was creating products for Oracle. And then I moved to Ann Arbor because I had to finish my PhD. I was still doing a PhD at the time. So I came here, wrapped up my PhD, and continued to work in Ann Arbor. I still live in Ann Arbor, 25, 30 years.
Wow.
That's my story on that.
I mean, you said a lot of great stuff there. One of the things that I really appreciate, and this has been true for me, is like how you mentioned when you came to the US, you had to like keep your be open to new perspectives, so to speak, or that's what I took away from it. And you mentioned, actually, we were talking before we went live about like your trip to India and to Europe. And I was actually supposed to go to India last year to meet with a number of healthcare CIOs, and learning about different industries and different cultures around the globe. I've had the opportunity to start doing that, just barely scratching the surface. And it just becomes so abundantly clear how much I don't know. And that's okay. I feel like you mentioned like a mantra at the beginning. Like one of my mantras is, I don't know, which is silly. I'll talk to people that are trying to start a business or grow something, and they're like, you mean like you're running a company? Like, you know what I mean? You don't know. And it's just, no, it's like when I come from that place and I'm a student of the world, like you mentioned, one of the things I heard along your kind of thread is the fact that you were a learner, like you just wanted to continue to learn and grow. And I think that is such like the guys and gals that I respect the most that I've had on podcasts, titans of industry, global heads of all sorts of companies, sold companies, humble students of the world. It's a really nice come from. I think it's clearly sustainable.
Okay, and the point I want to make is, one of the things which helps you is you come with a very open mind. If your expectations are lower and your roots are stronger, I think you grow faster and taller, right? That's a piece which is important, right? If you already have a preset set of expectations and you want to really go with that alone, now you just see you can adapt fast, right? So that's another piece you need to do is, in this world, what's most important is how well you adapt. As long as your compass, again, go back to that, right? Your compass is clear. I'll give you one thing. When I came to this country, I was a vegetarian, right? I still am. I never tried meat in my life. No, I'm not the only one. There are quite a few. I remember providing my first paper I was presenting was in New Brunswick, Canada. And I drove because I was a student, didn't have money. So drove with 7 other students from Detroit to New Brunswick, Canada. All I had food outside was eating hash browns. There was nothing else vegetarian available. So it was a tough, whatever time on that at the time. But now it is such a beautiful thing, right? Anywhere you go, plant-based diet is very common. I can have that. And now I was in Shanghai and I went to all plant-based restaurant. I was in Brazil when we think, oh, this is that I could get completely vegetarian restaurants there. And so I think that the world does change, and we just keep an open mind. And I try to stick to certain things which I said I feel it's valuable. And all of us do. As long as we hold on to certain things which are valuable to ourselves and keep a lot of things open and adaptable, I think I've grown faster and more happier.
100%. And for any like sales or vendor oriented people that are listening, right? I think that for me, when I made a decision to approach our potential customers without expectation, it just made such a huge difference. Because, and I think people can sense that, kind of like we were talking about before, where I'm interested in that individual and developing a relationship with that individual. And if I can serve them in this moment, great. And if not, that's okay too, because the inception of disruptive innovations was rooted in a CIO relationship that it was already 5 years old, and it was coming back around. It was 2 degrees outside my non-compete. And he was like, hey, are we doing this? And that's what lit the match. And that was because I focused on the relationship without expectation, right? So I think that's just an important little tidbit. It translates well to our friends in sales.
So it's a good story about how you started as well. You're talking, keep it open and say, how do we talk about that, and go and then try something new. The other piece I tell my kids is always try something new, try something difficult.
Yeah.
These two really help us, all of us, to say, guys, try something new, try something difficult. And when I continue to look back at where I come from and what I hold on dear, it also defines you as we go. I think not many people, it's not easy for us to define who we are. It helps to look back and see, guys, this is what has been constant in our lives. And that kind of helps you to define, if you can say, what do you have dear to yourselves from a principle, right?
Yeah.
And if that is strong enough and that's based on strong roots, that's going to help you to grow.
Right. What do you stand for and what actions have you taken? And I think of my mom and like her scaling this nonprofit from a 2-bedroom house in Somerville to this continuum of care throughout the state of New Jersey and the number of lives she's impacted. But it started only with 6 women at a time, but she grew it. Now they're serving thousands and thousands of people each year. And it's just, that's that greater purpose. And
That's an amazing story. I'll tell you one thing. This is something, other piece I talked about the sun. Let me add that other example, which appeals to me substantially, is what when you told about your mother, I remember it's a river. Be like the river. The river starts off small somewhere in the mountain. It doesn't start huge, it starts small, keeps growing. And if you find a small pebble, it goes over it. It finds a tree, it goes around it. It finds a big mountain, it goes around it. At times, it splits and joins. It keeps going because it has a goal to reach the ocean. I'm going to stop till it reaches it. All along the way, it takes the dirt, it helps all the beings, it feeds, it waters, right? It helps everybody else, but you keep moving, reaching towards it. You talked about it becomes huge. These rivers, when you look into where it starts to where they are right now, it's such an amazing story. And that all these things have so much to teach us, right? I think we start small and grow big. That's the right way to do it.
I love that. And I love that you brought up that analogy too, because I think about the river from the perspective of the spirit of the universe too. No matter what your denomination is, like when I'm in the place that I want to be, I'm going with the flow of that river, right? And now there can be times when I start to go against the river, when I'm in my own will, trying to do something and I can feel it. It's palpable. And if I'm tuned in enough, which hopefully I am today, I can feel that and I can let go of that and change direction. Because when I'm going with the flow of the universe, life is a lot easier. And it's just something that I've come to learn and appreciate. And that's not to say that everything's decided or anything like that. It's just that it's God's will versus my will, so to speak. Not to get philosophical or theological in this moment. It's funny. I had Andy Lehman on a year ago. He was the CIO at Kettering Health at the time, and we went on a whole tangent. So I don't want to go down the rabbit hole, but just it's very insightful stuff. One last question. So I want to hear a little bit more about the work you guys are doing at Cooper Standard, but we talk about this a lot on the podcast, like how growth is often spurred by uncomfortability. And I think back to a lot of pivotal moments in my career where when I was in the muck, that was actually what kind of ultimately helped me elevate to a new level in my career. So that all said, I'm curious if there was a time in your journey, personally, professionally, or otherwise, that you were dealing with a really difficult situation, or you had a project fail, or something that sticks out in your mind as something that you ultimately took away, a profound lesson or something of that nature.
See, there are quite a few, right? We all are built on multiple failures. It's not all success, and we learn from that. I always think that we are all running a hurdle race. We probably fall once in a while, but the winners and the losers difference is who can climb up fast from that and run. If you feel sad, if you feel sorry for yourself, you're going to lose for sure. The faster somebody gets up and continues to run the race is going to win it. And it's an analogy, but that's what I see. I have had quite a few. One of the things, let me say, one of the bigger things I learned from this was I was in a publicly traded company years ago, and Sarbanes-Oxley audit came in and started doing an audit of that. I was helping as a technology person to help that piece. And we found with that current CIO, CFO, a fraud, right? So they could find that. And so what it did was, I was not a finance guy, right? I was a good IT guy and continue to work on the technology sides of things. But I had to go through completely restating the company's income, forensic accounting, 5 years of restatements on this. The point there I learned was a couple of key learnings, right? One was the fact that it's very important to be ethical, and because it's not just for you, it affects so many people's lives. That stock
Mm-hmm.
had $40 stock, went to pink slips and couldn't trade, right? So it impacts a
Wow.
lot of people's lives, number one. Number two is I had a huge learning on finance and cash flows on how do you do that, new appreciation for all the stuff. So a shout out to my CFO and financial friends out there to say that really do appreciate all the work they do. It looks trivial from us. It doesn't look sexy, but that's an amazing kind of a thing. It's so critical what they do for us. And then the third aspect of that is during all this commotion where we are restating our financials and working with auditors and forensic accountants and SEC and the whole shebang on that, the CEO at the time took a leadership completely in a different angle and said, we're going to continue to develop products at the same or even more rapid pace. I think we had 40, 50 new products developed that year. Did not lose a single customer. So I think the point I started learning was in all our lives, you're going to have some parts or some areas where you're going to fail. So we have an option to fix all the failures and then go next, or continue to fix the failures and parallelly continue with the other line. How much can manage these two is very critical because it could be a failure in a personal front. You have to continue with the profession. You can't take that and give that back to your kids or your other family members. Or it may be a failure professional life and you have to continue. But a lot of times I see people cannot demarcate it in a nice way that they take one, they learn from that, apply it in another, go on. They can continue to be very porous in passing on the stresses. And this is a key learning I had that you can have a problem on one end. And if you can use transparency, you can use clear goals, clear visions and priorities, you can still continue to create revenue. You can continue to create your relationship with your customers. And this is so important today in the world of technology when cyber is a big piece, right? I always say that it's not if, it's when. Most companies are getting attacked sometime or not. And so if you are going to have that, there's one way to fall down, or the other way is to say, hack it while continue to progress in all other angles without holding completely. And this has helped me a lot of ways too, right? And I took that lesson to say, how do you stop pressure and stop problems trickling down? How can you hold it and say, you hold your foot on yourself, you have a problem, you hold it. Don't let that trickle down to the other side, which is not productive most of it. So these things have helped me to understand that. Again, finishing up that story there, yes, and then that company was sold to a private investors and it's doing very well, things like that. And that was the time I transitioned from the company as well. But it's a learning which I definitely remember and definitely don't want to replicate anywhere else. There are setup, we go through the time that's holy cow, that is stuff. And that is not pretty, but it's something which keeps me very grounded to say, if I go somewhere, very important to identify what's important in a company, what the culture of the company, what's critical, and a new respect for some of the rules, which we think, hey, busy work, paperwork. For our technologists, we don't always like all those paperwork and documentation and things like that, but a new appreciation for these. These are all part of the ecosystem, which keeps us all running in a nice way.
I'm the vision, technology, the financial. It was just funny because I like worked in finance for a couple of years. I don't know. It just doesn't do it for me. It doesn't like, and so those people, my colleagues, they thank God for them because they keep everything in check and make sure that my ideas make sense financially and otherwise. But I really appreciate everything that you had to say. And this is great stuff. I want to transition into some of your current work. Before I do, I always just like to ask favorite book or literary piece, either that you've read recently or all time, your choice.
I think I'll tell you one of the things I read and reread is a book called Predictably Irrational, interesting book by a professor at Duke. And the point of that is lot about saying that how we human beings are very rational and very predictable, right? And in if any small area to large area, it's so relevant today when we are talking AI and artificial intelligence and things like that. And say, if we are not watchful, all our irrationality will beautifully translate, because that's all the data we have, into a faster way of doing things, which is not always pretty, right? So I want to say something. I like to read. I'm reading a few other books. Why Simple Wins, right, by Liza Borel, which is, I think, from our side, it's very, very relevant at this time to say, we're talking about disruption, or the best way to disrupt is from inside. You probably have seen in your podcast multiple times, right? You break an egg from inside, you get new life. From outside, it's a one-day breakfast, right? So it's better to start disrupting from inside. And books like The Simple Wins and things like that help us to really rephrase our own lives, whether professional, company, or personal life, to say, what are we doing which are not required? It may be part of my life where my kids are moving out to college and I'm trying to simplify it. It all adds up, but I think it resonates well from where we are at. One of the things, maybe we'll talk more about it, but we haven't spoken about AI in 30 minutes. It's a record in itself. So any conversation, but if you're talking about AI specifically, it requires us to put a lot of data, a lot of information which gathered in the past, and leverage to use it in the future. So we are talking about simplicity. It's important for us to create a roadmap called the ontologies, right? Create those ontologies out there of everything we do. And that's a good time to rethink. How can we simplify, right? I know you said you don't want to touch philosophies, but many old cultures do this in a very repetitive way. Right? Jewish, we have the fact that another year you clean up, you look back, and I just see the same thing in the Hindus, where you clean up and they look back and simplify your life on that. This is a very critical kind of a model we all go through, and something to learn for us and apply it in our own professional lives. So that's some of the things I just take it up. One is philosophically, thought process, thought provoking. Other is more day to day. How do I make sure that what I learned, what I hear, hits me and use it forward, right? We all have success. Manufacturing, we use success and a lot of those concepts of that very well, keeping it clean. But it's important for us to also start using it in other parts of it.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. And we could talk more about the parallels between that and AI and automation, I'm sure, in a moment. So let's get into it. So global CIO, Cooper Standard. Talk to me a little bit about your vision for the organization, some of the key initiatives you guys are focused on, maybe even some of the challenges you're facing. Just give me the 411 on where you guys are at.
I mean, I'll tell you, Cooper Standard is a global company. We have about 100 different sites globally, and it had grown inorganically through acquisitions and things like that. So every other such company, you have substantial technical complexity, which comes with multiple versions of ERPs and things like that. But I'm very happy to say the journey for the last 5-6 years, we transformed the company into pretty much cloud-based, don't have data centers. And we are moved into end of this year, we'll have a single instance ERP from 35 ERPs. And we have a single PLM system, single HR system. And what this does, this helps us to be very fast and agile to respond to challenges outside, right? When we had a strike, we could respond back much better. When we are looking at analytics or things about in supply chain disruptions, we are much better off to respond with all the information and data. When we could go back, and when last year with the COVID timeframe, it was not trivial to manage supply chains, right? Anything between the Shanghai port getting stuck or Suez Canal stuck, or any of the European war situation out there, which causes supply chain impact, and some of these things coming together at the same time. These systems are very critical for us to help us to be resilient, but more importantly, to recover fast, right? And manage the problems. That's something which we have seen that. So I'm pretty happy about that. The journey is not done. As I said, end of the year, we'll have a single instance across 2 different business units. We have a single instance of that. But if I look into where we are from a challenge perspective, challenge is to say, we had a very aggressive schedule. I did 27, 28 different sites in a year to come to where I'm at right now. And so one of the mantras we had was adopt now, optimize later, right? So we just took it up and say, guys, let's have a template. Let's make a implementation factory and let's go fast on that. So this is a good time for us to reflect back and say, guys, what can we do to optimize? What can we do to make it better? And I think I think you talked about the start self-helping with all this AI and things like that coming up, and it's completely transforming and helping us to go faster even and optimize it better. So that's very optimized from a perspective. We are very looking forward to that in the next upcoming year and years. And that's where I'm at. Again, from a company perspective, as I told you, we are culture of Cooper Standard is something which appeals to me personally. It's a very winning culture, right? So if Cooper Standard products and product lines, we don't see a path to be one, two, or three leading in the industry, they just exit. And we have exited, divested those kind of industries. We are one globally in sealing, two in fluids, and that kind of thing is very critical for us as a company. And it trickles down across to have a winning culture. And what it does for IT is to enable that kind of a culture requires us a lot of agility and a mindset change within technology. So years ago, he was considered as an auto tape, right? So it was more a question of saying, guys, I just need to do that. Can you go do it for me? And I think it took a while for us where today we are a truly considered business partner. So there is a set of tasks which everybody is looking forward for us to deliver. And the demand is higher than the supply. And I think, and more importantly, it's that the shadow IT concept has substantially reduced. And that's a token to my team, who again is globally, and they are managing it not from just a pure technology, but also understanding the business. And some of the other things which we have done is a cross-pollination. My lead of finance has come from, used to be a controller in a plant, right? My material subject expert used to be a material manager in a plant. And similarly, I had people in IT who had moved into other parts of the business to go ahead and run that out. And that kind of a cross-pollination helps to understand the problems, to command the respect and collaboration, which is very critical to deliver. And the other piece, we do not do projects as IT projects. So all my projects have a co-sponsorship with somebody in IT and in my business partners here, right? Either the business unit or the functional units. So these things help us to really collaborate better. And those are, I think, some of the areas where it took us time to get that small wins. I said the reverse start small. So that small wins are very critical on that for us to grow. And then we grow fast and wider and deeper.
How many countries do you guys span?
I don't have a number now, maybe 60. I can get you that, maybe
60.
30.
Geez.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, whether it's 30 or 60, right? Just thinking about the commanding a project like that, not just from the standpoint of a multi-site technology rollout, which a lot of us who are listening are familiar with, but like when you go back to what we were talking about before, culturally, economically, just the language barriers. There's so many different nuances to rolling out projects like that.
Some examples on that, which is very interesting. We are, by the way, we're in 21 countries. But I'll tell you some examples of that. Right during COVID, we are moving into S4 HANA. That's a SAP's newer version of that in the cloud. And we said it's a cloud. It's also HANA Enterprise Cloud. So we are moving from ECC on-prem. And I have 85 different sites globally on SAP at the time. Okay. And it's on all 3-4 continents, right? Europe, Asia, North America, South America. And right when we started moving in, China hits with the COVID virus. They shut down. My team cannot even go down to print labels. So we are printing labels. And you talk about the chief transformation officer. I think COVID is for us. And I'll tell you why in a minute, right? So we said, oh, we have to travel to implement SAP or any of those instances. We didn't travel anywhere. Everybody stayed at home. We moved all the 85 sites from ECC to S4 HANA on the cloud, zero high tickets. That's a huge part of that. And I'm telling you, to go back to China, China cannot even print. So we are printing for them And we are scanning that out, showing it to somebody because you talk about language barriers. A lot of my team members here cannot read Chinese. So we take a copy of that, send it digitally out to them. They now read it to say, yeah, it may printed okay. Or it didn't print okay. Let me change it and do the same thing. Sure enough, 4 months later, we are shut down. China's back. So China can go ahead and print it for us and send it back, and we are checking it's okay. So you can either consider these things as barriers, or we can consider them as advantages. So it helped us really grow by saying, how do you leverage the countries, the time zones, the things like that out there to really grow, to make sure that we hit it without having any of those problems, which most of the ERP releases have a lot of issues, which I have been to. As I told you, it's not success by the first time. We have been through this multiple times where I have seen failures to come to where I'm at to say, guys, it was successful. More importantly, without any high tickets, right? A collaboration.
They plug your team. So this has been great. So I got a couple last questions for you. One would be, any thoughts on where you see Cooper Standard and or the manufacturing industry in general going in the future? Or maybe what do you think will be some of the biggest changes as time passes?
I think some of us may know this metaverse thing. I think it's impacting manufacturing and supply chain substantially. I think it's now you can consider that with Gen AI coming, metaverse has taken a kind of a winter. You can say it's down a little bit, but I think that's changing this whole digital trend. Digital testing is here to stay, where a lot of the testing is happening. So I think it's substantial changes is expected in the automotive industry and manufacturing in general. So the digital manufacturing is going to be a big piece of what we all do. And the software pretty much runs cars, and it's going to run manufacturing as we go forward, is what I can see it's happening in a few years. And I think the other piece of that, which is important, is when you're talking in general manufacturing, the integration, more engineering, manufacturing, purchasing, and finance is going to happen a lot more internally. And what this would do is, we talked about metaverse. What this would do is it's going to enable a much stronger blockchain. OEM and original equipment manufacturer all the way to the tier X of a software. And that's a great thing, which will remove substantial amount of wastage. If you think about it, inventory is stored in every piece of us. If I can reduce that to substantially lower, it's going to be a much better cost-effective solution, but more importantly, the speed of delivery. I know we didn't have time to talk about it in this podcast, but the whole Industry 4.0, how we are disrupting ourselves on that, or about how we are working on with Cooper Standard has its own spin-off called Liveline based on some of the technologies we developed. And we are selling a product of it. There are a lot of things out there which, as I said, if you have a goal which is higher than today, which is going to help us to move faster.
Love that. Yeah, super cool. Well, I'll have to have you back on one of these days to talk more about that stuff. Now, this is great though. So, final question I like to ask all my guests is just, if you could go back 5, 10, 15 years in time, what advice would you give your younger self?
Don't sweat the small stuff. It's just
Love it.
simple enough on that, saying that don't sweat the small stuff. Just everything will pass. Just hold on to that and need to work on that. My simplest advice is that, to not just to myself, but I do the same thing to my kids today. Is saying that this will pass. This is not something you should worry about. Don't stress this too much. And take it as a learning. Take this as, every one of them is a teacher for us. Take it as a learning and move.
Love it. So, thank you so much for your time today. It was a pleasure having you on.
Same here. It's a pleasure. Talk to you, David.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. We'll catch you all next week.